welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely fascinating and moving memoir about an extraordinary life. I am so excited and honored to have this conversation. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Sure. My name is Craig Yorke. The book is Steep. It is a short, mercifully short, and timely memoir of a Black neurosurgeon who made it a steep climb from a tough neighborhood in Boston to a thriving, busy, varied practice of neurosurgery in Middle America. And the book, the title has two meanings. It's an adjective, of course, the steep climb that everyone is familiar with, upward mobility, socially, and so forth. But the second meaning is what happens to tea or broth, a process of maturity, a process of becoming. And that meaning is more important to me. It's kind of the through line of the book. It's about how we relate to our past and to the past. Not what we had for breakfast, but the memories we'd rather not remember, if you will.
I do love that image and that sort of double meaning contained within the title. It also sounds like steep, the verb meaning that you were just mentioning, sounds like what you have to do with your own past as you are prepping to write a memoir. So I'm curious about if you could just tell us very briefly about your career and when it occurred to you to capture your past on the page.
I'll begin with my parents just real quickly. They were among the angriest and most talented people I ever knew. They were significantly wounded by their past in the early 20th century in Boston. And they treated their wounds by forging me, their only son, into a weapon against their humiliation and their experience. And they willed me to lead a life of steep ascent. The family was, if anything, too tight-knit. There was a lot of surrogacy. I led someone else's life for many years. So I got to a difficult high school in Boston, a public high school, Harvard College, Harvard Medical School, a steep trajectory toward an academic career, neurosurgical training, elite training at UC San Francisco, but then made a big shift to go to Topeka, Kansas with my new wife. And we gave it 6 months and we're still here. At about age 55, for a number of reasons, I left the operating room. And that began the process of steeping an armored identity, steeping certainties about many things. And a few years ago, I thought it was time to write a letter to our sons about who their dad had been, the kinds of memories that don't get any space at the family reunions or the Thanksgiving dinners. I'm writing along, and then Mary and I find ourselves in a long line to get into the Black Smithsonian in DC, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And as we get closer to the entrance, I see these lines above the door by James Baldwin. And those lines say, the great force of history is that it lives inside us and controls us unconsciously. So I'm shuffling forward and I'm thinking, there are a lot of people in this line, but the only guy Baldwin is talking to is me. I mean, this is directed absolutely at me. So I rethought what I was saying. Um, I started to look harder at the past and look with a broader lens and a little less hostility. And the next thing that happened, I mean, the stories got more complex. It started to become a very, very long letter all of a sudden. And then I thought of my favorite poem, which is written by a guy from St. Louis named T.S. Eliot. It's his last poem, Four Quartets, and the least opaque of what he wrote. Uh, but he talked about memory. He talked about history in Little Gidding, the last part of the poem, and he said, "This is the use of memory for liberation, not less of love, but the expanding of love beyond desire, and so liberation from the future as well as the past." So then I started thinking, well, maybe I can, get a hint of freedom from all this work of writing, this waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning with something different to put on the page and so forth. So I kept writing, got a manuscript. The story of getting into publication is a whole nother issue. But I wound up with, like I say, a mercifully short and timely book. I wrote it with my ears, for what that's worth. Uh, I'm not a poet, but I respect the economy of their language. I'm a big fan of what Twain said, Mark Twain, about the right word, the right word being lightning, and the almost right word being, the lightning bug. And I really was hoping to get as many right words into this little memoir as I could.
It's so lovely, and I do love the structure, which I would love to ask you about. It is not really a straightforward chronological narrative of a life so much as it is chosen stories, anecdotes, almost parables sometimes
Mm,
that you connect to the larger context of what's
yeah,
happening in 20th century America.
that,
And so could you talk a little bit about that choice and if there was any, heavily air quoted research that went into that, into your own personal archive to research your own past or into sources that would help you connect to that context?
there wasn't a lot of research. There were, I was getting warmed up after about 20 drafts. I would say that most everything on all of those pages is serving one or another purpose. It's either the meaning of steep as adjective or the meaning of steep as verb.
Mm.
Everything else I got rid of. I know that, and as a librarian, you know that the appetite for War and Peace and Pickwick Papers is low in today's world. So I needed something short, and I needed something that would kind of jump off the page. So it's a series of scenes from a life. Someone asked me whether it was a memoir or an autobiography, and it kind of occupies a middle ground because it is the whole of my life, but it doesn't have nearly the boring detail that anyone would get with an autobiography, at least of me.
Yeah, I do really love that structure, and it was a great way to learn about your life as well as the forces that acted upon it, both, in the wider context of the country and with your parents.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, there's a significant amount of time that you spend talking about the difficulty of parsing one's own goals from the goals that are thrust upon one by one's
yeah,
family.
yeah.
And you talk a lot about violin and medicine.
Hmm.
And maybe perhaps a strange question I have is, are there any similarities or overlaps in those two skill sets? Do you feel like one helped you with the other?
Good question. I am not sure. I am sure that I would have been better at both had I been more relaxed. And no, yeah, there's a lot of hand-eye coordination in both in both activities, um, but the ability to relax and focus at the same time would have been helpful for both of them.
Mm.
And, I play the violin every day now. I put it in the case for 35 years, but I play every day, and I'm the oldest member of the regional orchestra. But I would have done better had I begun meditating at a younger age. Because one thing I've noticed that does is that it allows you to focus and relax at the same time. And that is very valuable.
Mm. That feels like one of the main struggles of my life is learning to have that sort of that
Yeah,
balance.
yeah.
Mm. Um, so in this process of what you call making friends with the past, did you find that the process of, writing this down first for your sons and then for a wider audience,
Mhm.
did you find anything there that surprised you, or did you see anything in a new light that sort of reframed your experiences for you?
Well, the more I thought about my parents, the more admiration I had for them. A number of people have asked whether I am angry at my parents because they raised me in a bunker, essentially. For 6 years, I saw our little apartment, the subway, the high school, and that was it. That was my life. Uh, but that was a surprise. It was a surprise how astonishing the world is. If you're a neurosurgeon in a place like Topeka, you're on call a lot, you're working 80, 90 hours a week. And as you age into midlife, you know more and more and more about less and less and less. You know exquisitely how to remove this brain tumor or deal with this malformation, but the sublime surprises of the world you just don't see in that job. And well, when I went to the Grand Canyon, I was just, this is on planet Earth. How come I never knew about this? You know, just a little vignette. Speaking of that, the National Park Service keeps track of its visitors and how long they spend at the parks. I talked to a ranger when we got to the bottom, you know, the rim to rim trip, and he said, "How long do people stay at the Grand Canyon?" And I said, "I don't know, a half hour, hour and a half." He said, "The number is 17 minutes. That's how long people stay on average."
Wow.
They pile out of the RV, take a picture, get back in the RV, and leave. So yeah, there were surprises. I mean, definitely surprises.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, I imagine it reveals a lot about both yourself and your relationships and your place in the world and the world, and
Mhm.
how we are sort of in dialogue with it too. It is
Yeah,
shaping us just as we sort of shape it in turn.
yeah,
And the way that
yeah,
you have shaped it in particular in your career as a neurosurgeon, one of the things that you do capture very well, I think, is the pace and the mood and the tension of an emergency of this sort when
yeah,
you are
yeah.
called to action, and how high the stakes are both personally and professionally, and how the personal and professional gets all mixed up in very, very complicated ways sometimes. Could you talk about looking back on those aspects of your career in particular to capture on the page?
What people should know about neurosurgeons, I think, is that most of us enter the career with something serious to prove. That there's serious ambition there. And you should know, I guess, that neurosurgeons are not selected for emotional intelligence. The training programs select for left hemisphere capability, left-brained people. Um, I was lucky in a way to be coming to it from a Black perspective because I had the chance on my good days to switch places with people who didn't have any clothing on, didn't have any medical vocabulary, and needed some agency. So there was that. Uh, with respect to the high stakes operations, uh, that's a factor of training.
Mm.
It's like being trained to play at the US Open. You know, you don't start there. You start by drawing blood, you start by emptying a bedpan, you start by starting intravenous lines or closing someone's skin. And then, if you're lucky, your trajectory rises with the responsibility and the authority rising in tandem.
I'm always really struck by the sort of paradoxes caught up in that career where, your everyday is sort of, everybody else you encounter is like one of the worst days of their life, probably,
Exactly, exactly.
and the sort of emotional intelligence that requires, as well as the sort of, as a doctor doing these things, it feels like you need to be 110%, if not more, invested in what you're doing. And then also, I don't know, like, how do you also not shield yourself, but how do you prepare yourself for outcomes that you don't expect, you know?
Mm. I think that training is the key to that. I was very, very lucky in San Francisco to have residents senior to me who I could learn from. I could learn how to speak, how to shut up, how to walk into a room, how to sit down, how to place your hand, what words never to use, what pace, who in the room you should direct your words to. All of that is learned. And, all of us, me included, have encountered really terrible physicians, people who just never learned any of that somehow. Uh, but I was very, very lucky to see how it's done.
Well, my last question is about the cover, which is both a gorgeous piece of art and a fascinating piece of medical history.
It
Could
is.
you talk about what it is and why you chose it?
Yeah. Well, oh, I can't hold it up. It's just audio. Uh, it is a pen and ink drawing done by a guy named Ramon Cajal, who had a solo show actually at the Met, not far from where you live.
Oh, wow.
Um, he was born about 100 miles south of Madrid and was an impossible kid. He was attacking the neighbors' houses. He could not be apprenticed to any of the local tradesmen. His dad, who was the local doc, was just at his wits' end. All Ramon wanted to do was draw. So his dad said, "Okay, Ramon, we're going to go somewhere where you can draw." And so he took Ramon to the morgue, the local morgue, and Ramon kind of found his bliss. And a few years later, he's drafted into the Spanish army and fights a colonial war in Cuba, but takes his notebooks with him and keeps drawing. Contracts malaria, comes back to Spain, wants to be an anatomist. But at that time, in order to become an anatomist, you had to be a practicing doctor first. He didn't want to do that. So he failed the exam 3 times to become a practicing doctor. Ultimately passed the exam, became an anatomist. You know that in the late 19th century, the center of gravity of science was England and Germany. The people in Spain, particularly outside Madrid, were nobodies. They were faces at the edge of the banquet, if you will. But what he had was a pretty good microscope for the time, just like what high school kids use now. He had the ability to stain the material that he had, right? Really up to date stains. And he had his pen and his paper. Now, at that time, you couldn't you couldn't photograph what you could see under a microscope. That technology didn't exist. So he just drew and drew and drew and drew. And for reasons I don't quite understand, he was invited to the Royal Society to give a talk in London, like the epicenter of the establishment. And he got there and he said, gentlemen, every one of you in this room is wrong about the brain. You all think that it's an impenetrable collection of fibers, just this network that no one will ever understand. He said, that's not true. It's actually composed of a near infinite number of individual cells. I cannot prove that to you because our microscopes aren't strong enough. But I believe it, and I know it. And I know it because of the structure, how these nerves sit together. He said, furthermore, I believe that these nerves communicate with each other electrically. I can't prove that either, but just based on the structure, I know it is true. And finally, because I've looked at young organisms, old organisms, I know that the structure of these nerves change as the structure changes as organisms age. And I believe that that change in structure reflects learning by the organism. Now, typically what happens next is that everybody in the room jumps up and laughs this guy out of the room. He dies in obscurity, and 50 years later, people come to his tombstone and say, gee, I'm sorry, Ramon, you were right. But what actually happened that day was that everybody changed their mind, like on a dime. And what we call neuroscience was born that day. And 2 years later, Cajal becomes the only anatomist ever to win the Nobel Prize for medicine. And he's proven right about the electrical transmission 20 years later. He's proven right about individual cells 60 years later by electron microscopes. And he's proven right about the structural correlate of learning maybe 2 or 3 years ago, or 5 or 10, as people looked at the way synapses change. So this is a serious cover. Please don't judge the contents of the book by this, because it sets a very, very high bar. And I haven't even talked about what that cell does. There's 15 million of them in every human brain. So it's kind of a symbol of unity. And they sit at the bottom of the brain, and they're very quiet listeners, another metaphor for today's times. 99.9% of their structure is for listening. And what they listen to is muscle tone. And what they do is relax us. And you say, well, what's the use of that? Well, if you want to stand up, if you want to walk, if you want to write a line on a letter, if you want the muscles of your eyes to track across a line of print, none of that is possible without these cells. So it is an avatar for beauty, for imagination, for genius, for function, for species unity. And I can only hope that the text comes somewhere close to what that cover is about.
It's such a lovely image, and I love the story for reminding us, I think, that oftentimes the boundary between art and science is a lot fuzzier than we think it is, as your life also shows.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And, let me just say one other thing for people who are book folks. I was, you might not be surprised that no one in the New York publishing world knows my zip code or knows anything about Kansas. So I was lucky to find a local publisher. But the advantage of that is that you get to have real input onto the cover. If you work with Simon & Schuster, they've got affinity groups and they've got committees that decide what the cover is. So I'm very lucky in that way. And it's been a delightful surprise, how the whole thing is unfolded.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I'm glad that it was brought to me, and I thank you for sharing your
Oh,
time and your book with me and our listeners. I think this is going to be one that I recommend to a lot of our readers. Listeners, please check out Steep, A Black Neurosurgeon's Journey. It is available now. It will be available as you hear this. So please check it out. It's an absolutely beautiful and fascinating and insightful read. I think you'll really enjoy it. Okay, it is time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.